On the morning of the fourth day, I found a track in the snow 6 feet from where Paul had slept. I want to be careful about the ordering of this because I've thought about it a great many times since we came back. There's a tendency to rewrite the memory, to say I knew from the beginning, that I felt something the moment we turned off the logging road. That's not what happened. What happened is that I woke up before the others on day 4, went to get wood from the pile on the east side of the cabin, and found a single impression in the hardened crust that stopped me the way very few things have stopped me in my life. 22 inches across, oval roughly, with no clear claw marks, no animal print that size has no claw marks. Pressed deep into the snow, deeper than my own boot prints beside it, which meant whatever made it was significantly heavier than I was. I stood over it for a long time before I followed the line back toward the tree line. I found one more impression at the edge of the spruce, 15 feet back. That was the stride, 15 feet between the 2 prints, which meant whatever had made them had come from the tree line, approached to within 6 feet of where Paul was sleeping, and then turned around and walked back into the trees. If the call got to you, subscribe. I'll keep the stories coming 3 times a week. I called the others out before I said anything. I wanted to see their faces when they found it without knowing what they were looking for. Paul said, "What made that?" I said, "I didn't know." Marcus crouched beside it for a long time. He pressed 2 fingers into the edge of the impression and felt how deep it went. He didn't say anything. Kevin said, "It could have been a bear." I said, "Bears don't leave oval tracks and don't walk 15-foot strides and don't come in November in this part of Ontario." He said, "Maybe a moose." The shape was wrong for a moose. We all knew what moose tracks looked like. Nobody had a word for it. We went back inside and made breakfast, and none of us said what we were thinking, which was that the impression was new. The snow surface had only hardened overnight, which meant the print was made after midnight, and whatever had made it had crossed 20 feet of open crust between the cabin and the tree line without breaking through, except in those 2 spots. We had not heard it. I should describe where we were, because it matters. 7 hours from the city, then 2 more on logging roads, past the point where your phone stops pretending to have service. The nearest occupied building was 23 kilometers away. We had a satellite phone with a 2-hour battery that we'd been conserving. Weather had been clear and cold. Days at -22, nights further. The kind of cold that makes sound strange, that makes the dark feel thicker than it should. We had done this 4 times in 8 years, the same 4 of us, the same rented outfitter's cabin, the same general territory. We knew it well enough that the familiar danger had stopped registering as danger. That's the only way I can account for how long it took me to understand what the track was trying to tell us. The game had been wrong since day 3. I noticed it, but didn't say anything. The beaver pond at the north end of the property should have been active at that time of year. It always was. Instead, it was completely still, not just quiet, empty. No ravens working the ice, no sign of the deer we'd seen moving along the eastern tree line on day 1. Even the squirrels were gone. One of the game cameras had been triggered at 2 in the morning and recorded 42 seconds of darkness before switching off. Nothing in the frame. I told myself the cold had pushed the animals out, that pressure systems do strange things to gain movement. I filed it and kept hunting. After the track on day 4, I stopped filing things. Cool. The watched feeling started on day 5. I was in my stand on the western edge of the property, early light, waiting for movement along the cedar ridge. I turned left without knowing why. Not a sound, not a movement, nothing I could point to. I just turned. There was nothing in the tree line at the angle I'd turned to look at, but the feeling had been directional, specific. The way you feel when someone in a room is watching the back of your neck and stops when you move. I had been observed from a particular angle, and whatever was doing, it had adjusted when I looked. I stayed in the stand another 90 minutes. The feeling didn't come back. But I kept looking at that section of spruce. Marcus checked the trail cameras that afternoon. All 4 had triggered between midnight and 4 in the morning, each one at a different hour, spaced across the perimeter of the property. 3 of the recordings showed the same thing. Darkness, some movement in the corner of the frame that could have been wind, and then the camera switching off. The 4th camera had rotated 40 degrees on its strap, still mounted, still attached, but turned to face a direction we hadn't aimed it. Paul said wind. I didn't argue, but wind doesn't turn a camera 40 degrees on its mounting strap. Wind doesn't trigger 4 separate cameras across 4 points of the perimeter, each one at different time through the night, in a pattern that follows the same clockwise direction as a person or something circling the property. By the end of day 5, I had a count. 4 things: the game silence, the track, the directional watched feeling, the cameras. Any one of them I would have explained away and forgotten. All 4 together, in sequence, over 5 days. That was a pattern. And patterns in terrain like this are what you pay attention to, because the terrain is not trying to scare you. It has no interest in you at all. When things accumulate, it's because something is accumulating them. I sat with this alone that evening. I didn't want to say it out loud until I understood what I was saying. I woke at 3 in the morning on the night of day 5 to total silence. Not quiet, silence. The generator was still running. I could see its standby light through the window, but the sound was gone. The wind in the spruce, the small settling sounds the cabin makes in deep cold, the distant creak of the ice on the pond, all of it stopped, like something had closed a door around the property that sound could not pass through. I lay still, and I counted. At 11 minutes and some seconds, the sound came back. All at once. The generator, the wind, the ice, small noises of the cabin. Everything returning together as if it had never been absent. I did not sleep again that night. Marcus stopped eating on the morning of day 6. He said he wasn't hungry. He poured his coffee into the snow off the porch and stood there looking at the tree line for a long time, not moving. And I watched him from inside without saying anything. He was looking at a specific section of the spruce, the same section I'd been watching from my stand the day before. I didn't ask him about it. That morning, I went back over our trail from the previous evening and checked the snow. My boot prints from the walk to the woodpile were still clearly visible in the crusted surface, a clean line from the cabin door. Bisecting them at an angle was a single large impression, not a full track, one where something had stepped across my path and continued toward the eastern tree line. I measured the stride backward from where it came from, using arm spans, 15 feet. The same stride as the track outside Paul's window on the fourth morning. Whatever it was, it had been walking through our camp in the night, inside the perimeter, walking while we slept. That evening, I said we should consider leaving a day early. The weather window was closing, and the logging road would be rough by Sunday. Nobody argued. Nobody mentioned any other reason to go. Kevin said, before we turned in, that he'd heard something on the roof the previous night. Not a branch. Something with deliberate weight, moving from one end to the other, like it was testing the surface. Paul said probably a branch. Kevin said, yeah, probably. Neither of them sounded like they believed it. Day 7. We woke to a smell from the north end of the property. Not strong, just present. Something organic and wrong. Like a barn that had been closed too long. Like something that had been warm and wasn't anymore. Paul went to look for a dead animal and came back having found nothing. The smell moved while he was out there. It was at the north end when he left and at the east end when he came back, as if whatever was carrying it had relocated while he was searching. He said he didn't find anything. I didn't say what I thought that meant. I saw it once, briefly, at the edge of the clearing, as I was coming back from checking the woodpile. A shift of mass between two spruce trees. Not the trees themselves moving, not a trick of light changing on the branches. Something vertical and large, present for the time it takes to draw one breath, and then gone. No sound when it went. I did not call out. I walked back to the cabin and told the others we were leaving after we ate. The logging road was hard, but passable. We drove out without much talking. 15 miles from the cabin, the headlights caught something at the left edge of the road, standing upright at the tree line, completely still, watching us pass. Too large for a man, wrong proportions for anything else I know. It was there for 3 or 4 seconds before the road curved and the headlights moved past it and it was gone. Paul said, "What was that?" Nobody answered him. He didn't ask again. We got back. No report was filed. I've thought about what we would have written, and I can't find the language that would have served it. Marcus was different through December. He ate less, slept poorly, went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with his usual personality. The doctor found nothing wrong with him. By February, he was more or less himself. He doesn't hunt anymore. He's never explained why, and I haven't asked. What I keep returning to is the patience of it, not the track on the 4th morning, not the silence at 3 a.m., or the mass between the trees. The patience. 6 days of circling the camp, watching from the tree line, moving through the night inside our perimeter, and then not acting. 6 nights of being close enough to cross 6 feet of open snow to where a man slept, and choosing instead to turn around and walk back into the trees. I don't know what that choice involved. I don't know what influenced it. We left on the 7th day, and whatever was out there let us go, and I cannot account for that any more than I can account for the rest of it. The stride is what stays with me most. 15 feet, on a crust that should have collapsed under something that heavy. But it held as if nothing had passed over it, except at those 2 points where something chose to press down and leave a mark. I've hunted this country for 22 years. I know what lives in it. I know their tracks and their habits and how they moved through new snow and hardened crust, and I know none of it made that print. And I know that whatever did make it was moving through our camp in the dark, that it knew exactly where each of us was sleeping, and that it was doing this not once, but across 6 consecutive nights. I don't think about it all the time. I go weeks without thinking about it. But there are nights when the house is dark and the yard is quiet and there's no reason to be awake, when I find myself thinking about what was patient enough to wait 6 days, what patience like that means, what it was waiting for. I've never come up with an answer that satisfies me. I'm not sure I want one. The following journal was found among the personal effects of James Allen, trapper, recovered from a remote camp approximately 90 kilometers north of Cochrane, Ontario, in the spring of 1978, when his brother drove up to retrieve his equipment after James failed to return from his November season. The cabin was intact, the stove was cold, the supplies were largely untouched. James Allen was not found. No remains have been recovered. The journal is reproduced here as it was found, with minor corrections for legibility, where the handwriting deteriorated in the later entries. November 4th, arrived Tuesday. The drive up was long and the logging road past the third junction was worse than last year. Have to remember to bring chains for that stretch. The camp is in good order, which is what I pay the outfitter for. Stove draws well, the cache is dry, the roof has held. Set the main line yesterday and ran it this morning. Good early signs. Martin sign on the northwest leg. Beaver activity on the pond below the camp. Weather is clear and cold, maybe -12 in the evenings. The kind of cold that is honest and manageable as long as you respect it. The camp radio is weak this far north, which I expected. I'll get a signal on a clear day if I'm patient, not urgent. Nobody is expecting me before the end of the month, and I told my brother I'd call if I had a problem, and not to worry otherwise. I never have problems. This is my 11th season on this line, and I know its rhythms the way you know your own house in the dark. November 7th. Good runs all week. The Martin line is producing, and I had a very good beaver on Wednesday. A big male, worth the effort. The weather is holding cold and clear. There's something I want to put down, not because it worries me particularly, but because I am a man who records things, and this is a record. For the past 3 days, I've had an intermittent sensation in my chest, a deep cramp, or something like a cramp, a tightening behind the sternum that comes on without warning, lasts maybe 30 seconds, and then releases slowly. It happens 2 or 3 times a day, sometimes more. I pressed on my breastbone this evening, and it felt different from how I expected. Denser, somehow, like pressing on a bruise that has gone deep enough to reach something harder than it should be. I'm not given to hypochondria. I'm writing this down the way I write down everything. Weather, yield, any detail that might be useful to know later. Probably the exertion, the altitude, the cold. Probably nothing. November 8th. The cramp in my chest was bad this morning. Worse than the previous days, lasting longer. I sat with it for about 2 minutes and breathed through it the way you breathe through a muscle cramp, slowly and without tensing against it, and it eventually released. My appetite is off today. Not gone. I ate breakfast, though not with much interest. But the venison I thawed for dinner sat in the pan, and I looked at it and put it back in the cold. Had crackers instead. Blamed the altitude adjustment, which takes longer some years than others. Also, the temperature inside the cabin is lower than the stove output warrants. I checked the stove, draws fine, no blockage. The fuel is burning clean. The thermometer reads 58 degrees even with a full box. I added more wood and it came up a degree and held. That's probably fine. Old cabins have cold spots. I've just never had this one do that before. November 9th. Something I need to put down plainly without dressing it. I woke at 2 this morning. The stove had burned low and the cabin was cold. Cold enough to see my breath. Cold enough that my fingers were stiff when I reached for the blanket. I lay there, getting my bearings, the way you do when you wake cold and sudden. And I heard a sound. It was inside my chest. Not my heart, not any breathing sound. A sharp, small crack. The sound ice makes when it expands, when cold enough air reaches a surface that's been holding warmth, and the warmth gives way. Just one crack, and then silence, and then another from a slightly different location, and then a third. I lay completely still and listened to my own body make that sound for about 40 seconds. Then I got up and fed the fire and sat at the table in the dark until the light came. I know what the accounts say about that sound. I've been coming to this country for 30 years, and the stories that circulate among men who work these territories are not the stories you find in books. They move mouth to ear, told quietly without drama, the way you'd pass on information about ice conditions or weather signs, because they are information about conditions, about a specific kind of danger that exists in this kind of place. The men who told them to me didn't tell them as folklore. They told them as instruction. The old trappers in this country, the ones who'd been here a long time and learned from the people who had been here longer, they knew what to listen for. They'd press an ear to a sick man's chest and listen, and if they heard that sound, they made certain decisions quickly, because certain decisions lose their effectiveness if you wait. I'm writing this down because I write everything down, not to alarm myself, just to record. November 11th. I'm not eating. This is harder to account for than the sound. I've been in the field in November for 11 seasons, and I have never had a poor appetite out here. The cold demands calories, and the body knows this without being instructed. But for the past 3 days, I've been cooking and looking at the food and putting it away again. I had crackers yesterday, coffee, which I can still stomach. The smell of the venison in the pan makes me actively nauseated, which is something I've never experienced. The sound is still there. I've started noting the times: 11:40 p.m., 2:15 a.m., 6:30 a.m. It comes at night most reliably, when the cabin is at its coldest and the dark is at its fullest. During the day is less frequent but still present. I can sometimes bring it on by taking a very deep breath. The full expansion of the lungs seems to reach something in there, to put pressure on it. The sound that results is not a lung sound. I know my own lung sounds. This is coming from somewhere between the lungs and the ribs, from the layer of the self that doesn't usually make noise. When I press my palm flat against my chest and hold it there, I can feel that the temperature behind the breastbone is lower than the skin. Not dramatically. A degree, maybe 2. But consistent. Every time I check. I have not been running the trap line the past 2 days. The traps are sitting untended, which I've never allowed before. I went out yesterday morning with every intention of doing the northwest leg and turned around after 100 yards without a clear reason. Something about the direction of the cold, the way the forest sat in that direction, the knowledge that I would be moving away from the cabin and towards something I didn't want to be near. I came back and sat at the table and looked at the wall for about an hour. That's not something I do. I'm recording it because it is not something I do. November 12th. I've been going through the accounts in my memory, trying to be systematic about it, the way I'd think through any field problem. The early stage, this is what I'm in. The signs I can confirm, the sound, the appetite change, the cold that originates from inside rather than from outside, the timeline. In the accounts it varies, but the consistent detail is that there is a window, a period before the transformation crosses what they called the still point, the moment the heart fully gives way and there's no bringing it back. The measures for that window, in the older accounts, hot bear fat or duck fat, administered as an emetic to cause the sick person to vomit what has taken hold inside them. Chunks of ice, they say. The seat of the possession externalized. I have neither bear fat nor anyone to administer it. The nearest person is 90 kilometers south. The radio has been dead since Wednesday. Not unusually dead, just dead, which is normal for this location and this time of year. I'm going to leave in the morning. I've packed what's essential. The snowshoes are in good order. The crust on the snow is firming, and I've made this approach in worse conditions. 90 kilometers is a significant push, but not impossible in stages. I'm in good physical condition, or I was a week ago. I'm going to put this journal in my pack and keep writing if I can. November 13th. Morning. Started at first light. The snow is deeper in the open sections than I hoped. Thigh deep where the wind has packed it into the low ground. I'm moving, but slowly. The sound has moved. This is the thing that troubles me most as I walk. It is no longer only in the center of the chest. I can feel it in my left shoulder now, and along the back of my left arm. Not constant, intermittent, but the geography of it has changed. In the accounts, movement means spreading. I have been thinking about how to describe the sensation as I walk. The closest I can get is this. It's like having a very cold stone lodged somewhere inside you that the body has decided to accept. Not pain, not illness exactly, just presence. A cold and specific presence that was not there before, and that I cannot will away. My body moves normally, processes normally, my thinking is clear. From the outside, walking, I am a man on snowshoes in a boreal forest in November. From the inside, I'm something slightly different, and the difference is growing. November 13th, evening, made about 10 kilometers, set up under a spruce stand to block the wind. This is manageable. I have enough in me for 2 more days of this, if the snow cooperates. 80 kilometers remaining. I'm writing this because I write everything down, and because I understand that the later entries may not be clear. The handwriting in the November 12th entry was already worse than usual, and I could see it was worse. I want, while I still have clarity, to say what seems important. Knowing doesn't protect you. People think knowing the law is a kind of armor. If you recognize the signs, if you name them clearly, you have an advantage. You don't. The knowing just means you understand what you're watching happen. It means you can write it down accurately. I'm not sure that's better, but it's what I have. And the man who keeps records keeps them to the end. The spruce blocks the wind well. The cold outside tonight is probably -25. The cold inside is something else. I can feel it exactly, centered now, 1 inch behind the left collarbone. I'm going to try to sleep. I'll start again at first light. I'm going to get out. I'm writing that down too. They had been on the logging road for 11 hours when the axle went. It went without drama. A lurch, a grinding sound that lasted exactly 2 seconds. And then the truck sitting wrong on the ice-rutted track in a way that was final rather than fixable. Dana was in the passenger seat. She heard the sound and understood it before Marcus, who was driving, said anything. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Outside, the snow was coming sideways. Not a storm exactly. The weather app had called it a system, which was meteorologist language for sustained misery, and the visibility was down to maybe 40 feet. The logging road behind them was already filling in. Cole and Priya were in the back seat. They'd been asleep. Cole woke first, looked at the angle of the truck and said, "Oh, just that." Priya took longer to come around, and when she did, she checked her phone for signal and got what they all got, which was nothing. 4 people, 3 days of food in the packs they'd brought for the weekend, a sleeping bag each, 1 good emergency blanket. The nearest town was 62 kilometers south on a road that was now impassable. The emergency protocol was orderly, which was the kind of group they were. Outdoor people, experienced people, not prone to panic. They stayed in the truck for the first night, running the engine in intervals to preserve fuel, keeping the carbon monoxide moving by cracking a window. Marcus had been in situations before and took charge without anyone asking him to, which the others were grateful for. He went over what they had and what the options were, and the options were stay with the vehicle, which was the correct choice, and wait for a signal, or for the weather to break, or for someone to come looking, which would happen when they didn't check in Monday morning. Today was Saturday. That was 36 to 40 hours. The first night was hard, but survivable. Cold, cramped, aware of each other in the way that shared physical discomfort makes you aware of people. The quality of their breathing, the position of their elbows, the specific rhythm of their anxiety. Dana slept in intervals. She woke around 3 and looked across at the dark tree line visible through the passenger window and thought about how far they were from anything. Sunday morning, the weather lifted enough to get out of the truck. They found a small maintenance shelter, maybe 200 yards off the road. A logging company hut used for equipment storage, unlocked, 4 walls and a roof, and a metal box stove with a quarter cord of split wood beside it. It wasn't comfortable, but it was better than the truck, and they moved their supplies into it and started the stove and ate breakfast from the packs. Except Cole didn't eat breakfast. He sat on one of the wooden crates with his hands around his coffee mug and looked at the food that Marcus had parceled out and said he wasn't hungry. That was all. Marcus looked at him for a moment and didn't push. Priya offered him her granola bar, which he declined. Dana watched him hold the coffee without drinking it. She told herself it was the cold and the disruption of the night. Some people's appetites go when they're stressed. And Cole was a person who internalized things. She knew him well enough to know that. She filed it and moved on. They spent the day conserving heat, rationing wood, taking turns sleeping. Marcus found a signal on his phone at noon for about 30 seconds, enough to get a text out to his wife with their approximate location. The reply, when it came, 4 hours later, said, "People are coming. Stay put. 24 hours." That was better than it could have been. That information settled everyone. Cole still hadn't eaten at lunch. When Dana put a pack of crackers near him, he picked one up and looked at it and put it back down. Sunday evening was when the other things started. Dana had been watching Cole in small ways all day, not obsessively. She was managing her own fear, helping with the wood, keeping the conversation going in the low, easy way that people keep conversation going when they need the sound of normalcy. But she was watching. There's a specific attention you develop towards someone when something registers as wrong, but won't come into focus. A sideways, peripheral awareness, the way you monitor a sound in the wall. She had that attention fixed on Cole all afternoon, and what she collected during the afternoon was this. He didn't move unless asked. He didn't initiate anything. He answered questions in full sentences that were completely appropriate and somehow conveyed nothing about what was happening inside him. He was present in the way a held door is present. Functional, correct. Not quite a person. The cold inside the hut was wrong. The stove was burning well. Marcus had fed it regularly. And the thermometer they'd found in a supply drawer read 54 degrees, which was low but not unusually so for a space that size with that fuel. But Dana kept feeling a deeper cold that didn't correspond to the room temperature. A cold that she associated when she tried to locate it with the direction of where Cole was sitting rather than with the walls or the floor. She moved around the small space, and the sensation moved with her perspective, not with her location, which was the kind of observation that made her not want to examine it too closely. Cole had taken the corner furthest from the stove. He hadn't moved from it in hours. His sleeping bag was pulled around his shoulders, and his eyes were open, not watching anything, not reading, just open in the way eyes are open when the mind is somewhere else entirely. He answered when spoken to. He was coherent. He was just very still and very far away. At some point around 9, Dana noticed that his breath wasn't misting the way theirs was. The air in the hut was cold enough that exhaled breath was visible. She could see her own, could see Marcus's and Priya's. Cole's breath, when she watched carefully, was barely there, as if his body temperature had dropped to something close to the air around him. She watched him for about 10 minutes. She didn't say anything to the others. The nightmares started that night. Cole cried out in his sleep at about 2 in the morning. Not a scream, something quieter and more specific, a sound like a word he couldn't complete. He was asleep for seconds afterward, seamlessly, as if the sound had not come from him. Dana was already awake. She'd been sleeping badly, and she lay in the dark and listened to his breathing and thought about the breath that didn't mist and the food that sat untouched and the corner he'd chosen that was furthest from the warmth. She thought about what she knew. She'd grown up in this part of the country, which meant she'd grown up with certain knowledge the way you grow up with weather knowledge. Not something you look up, just something you carry. Her grandmother had been precise about it and unsentimental. She'd sat Dana down when Dana was maybe 11 and explained what the stories meant and what to watch for. In the same tone she used to explain which mushrooms not to touch. Not scary, informational. Because knowing is better than not knowing when you are in country where the knowledge is relevant. There are signs. She knew the signs the way she knew other practical things, which is to say, she knew them but had never expected to use them as a diagnostic. She had been using them as a diagnostic for 12 hours, and she had not said anything to Marcus or Priya, and she was not going to say anything to Marcus or Priya, because the thing about that kind of knowledge is that it doesn't help you once you've said it out loud in a small room. It only creates a second problem on top of the first one. She lay on the floor of the shelter and waited for morning. Monday, the rescuers came at around 2 in the afternoon. A county sheriff's truck and a forestry service vehicle, chains on both, coming up the logging road from the south. Dana heard the engines before she saw them and felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't realized was wound tight. She'd spent the morning as she'd spent most of the night, watching Cole in that peripheral way, measuring small things. The color of his face, which was grey pale in a way that she told herself was the cold and the poor sleep. The way he sat without shivering, when all 3 of the others were shivering. The way he'd accepted a cup of coffee that morning and let it go cold without drinking it. They walked Cole out between them. He walked on his own, straight, steady, no trouble with the snow. At the diner in town, where they stopped to warm up before the drive back, he ordered a burger and ate most of it. He drank 2 cups of coffee. He was quieter than usual, but not alarming. He smiled when the waitress refilled his cup. Dana sat across from him and ate her food and watched him eat and thought, this is fine. This is a person who was cold and stressed and is now warm and fed and fine. She thought that all the way through dinner. She thought it on the drive home, with Cole in the back seat asleep against the window, his breath fogging the glass now, the way it should, the color back in his face. She's thought it many times in the months since. She tells herself, he ate the burger, his breath showed, he's fine. She tells herself 2 days of stress in the cold. That's all it was. She's been trying to remember whether the breath was actually missing or whether she was tired and cold and scared, and her perception was unreliable. She has almost convinced herself it was the latter. A person's breath is harder to see in some lighting conditions. A person who is very still exhales shallowly. The hut was not well lit. All of this is true, and she's been leaning on it. The memory is not sharp enough to be certain, and certainty is what she would need to say anything to anyone, and she doesn't have it. What she has instead is the way Cole held that first granola bar on Sunday morning, picked it up, looked at it for a moment, put it back down. The specific quality of that look, not distaste, not stress. Something more like a person examining an object that has become, overnight, categorically irrelevant. The way you'd look at something that your body has simply stopped having a framework for. She sees that look sometimes, in the way you see things that you've spent a long time not looking at directly. She hasn't said anything to anyone. She doesn't know what she would say. She doesn't know what she knows. She does know that she's thought about Cole's grandmother's old place up near International Falls, where Cole used to spend summers as a kid. She knows he'd been up there alone the week before the trip, checking on the property, he'd said. She knows that's where he was when they picked him up for the drive north. She hasn't let herself think too carefully about that, about what he might have encountered up there alone the week before. She's filed it with everything else, under probably nothing. You want to hear the story? I have told myself I would tell it one day, and you are old enough now, and the winter is long enough that I suppose there is no better time. This was 1847. I was 23 years old, which feels like something that happened to a different man entirely. We were at a small post on the Rivière aux Outards. 8 men, not counting the 2 Inuit trappers who came and went through the season, and who had more sense than any of us, though we did not see it that way at the time. The post was a collection of low buildings that leaked cold in through every seam. It was the kind of place that does not exist anymore, and I am not sorry for that. You worked, you trapped, you recorded what came through, and in the deep months of winter, you sat very close to whatever fire you had and tried to remember that spring was a real thing that existed in the world. Thomas Archon was among us. He was from somewhere near Trois-Rivières. I never learned exactly where. He was a quiet man, careful with his words, well liked in the uncomplicated way that quiet men sometimes are. He was not remarkable in any way that I can describe to you. He had a young wife at home. He spoke of her sometimes, briefly, and then went silent in the way men do when they are trying not to feel what they feel. He was good at his work. He minded what was his and left alone what was not. The winter of 47 was severe, even for that country. By February, the cold had a quality to it that went beyond mere temperature. It felt intentional, somehow. Pressed. The Innu men had spoken earlier in the season about the weight of that particular winter, though I did not have enough of their language to understand more than the shape of what they were saying. They left in mid-January, ahead of the worst of it. I have thought about that departure many times since. Thomas fell ill around the middle of February. At first, it seemed like nothing. A man running a fever in a winter camp was not an occasion for worry. He sweated through his blankets one night and emerged the next morning pale and quieter than usual. He did not eat his breakfast. He did not eat dinner that evening either. We assumed the fever had taken his appetite. That is ordinary enough. But on the 3rd day, he came to the table and looked at what was set before him. Salt pork and hardtack, nothing unusual, nothing particularly good or bad. And he looked at it the way you might look at something you had found dead in the woods. Not disgust, exactly. Something more like recognition. He pushed the plate away and said he was not hungry and went back to his bunk. By the 5th day, he was sleeping a great deal and complaining of cold. Not the ordinary cold of the building, but something inward, he said. He pressed his hands to his chest when he said it, the way you press on a bruise to see if it still hurts. He said it felt like something had gotten inside him and was spreading. He said it the way you say something you are trying to convince yourself is ordinary. He did not look convinced. We brought him closer to the fire. It did not help. That 6th night, I was on watch. Not a formal watch. Only the habit some of us had of sleeping lightly and checking the fire through the small hours. I heard Thomas moving in his bunk, not thrashing, but shifting in a particular anxious way. When I looked over, he was awake and staring at the ceiling. I asked him how he felt. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I have been dreaming." Just that. I've been dreaming. I asked him what he dreamed. He turned his face away. In the morning, he told us. He gathered the men. There were 6 of us at the post at that point, the other 2 having gone out to check lines. He stood near the fire and he spoke carefully, the way Thomas always spoke. The careful words of a man who does not want to be misunderstood. He said that he had dreamed of the others in the camp. He said that in the dream he had been hungry in a way that had nothing to do with food. He said the hunger had a direction to it, and the direction was toward the other men. He said he woke up and the hunger had not entirely gone away. He told us to listen to his chest. I want you to understand what that means, what he was asking. He had heard the stories. We all had. Any man who spent time in that country had, and he was asking us to perform the one test that mattered. You press your ear to a sick man's chest against the sternum and you listen. If you hear nothing unusual, you hear a heart. If you hear something else, a sound like green wood cracking in the cold or ice shifting underweight, then you know. Thomas opened his shirt. He stood there in the firelight with his chest bare, and he said, "Listen, tell me what you hear. Tell me the truth." We went one by one. I was the second to listen. I put my ear to his chest, just below the collarbone, and I held my breath so I could hear clearly. His heart was beating. That much was certain. Around that sound there was something. There is no way to say it precisely, even now. There was a quality to the sound of him that was not quite right, a faint something beneath the heartbeat. Whether it was ice, whether it was the cold air in the room, whether it was the fever producing some change in the tissue of his chest, whether it was the sound of my own fear, I cannot tell you. I have turned it over in my mind for nearly 50 years, and I cannot tell you what I heard. The third man, Beaumont, came away from Thomas's chest, white-faced, and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Yes." The fourth man, Furland, said he heard it too. The fifth man, Les Tourneaux, would not look at Thomas after he listened. Only Gourdet, the oldest of us, said he wasn't sure. Said it could be the fever. Said fever did strange things. But he said it quietly, and the others were not quiet, and the room had already shifted in some way that could not be shifted back. Thomas himself had been watching us. When the last man stepped back, he nodded once, like he had already known. He said, "I am asking you to do it before dawn. I'm asking you to do it now while I am still myself." He said it calmly. He said it the way a man says something he has already decided, something he has worked through in the dark hours while the others slept. He was not weeping. He was not shaking. He was the most composed man in the room, and that was its own kind of terror. He said, "I do not want to find out what happens otherwise. I will not describe to you what followed. It is not something that requires description. It was done quickly, and with what care could be managed. And then we built the fire higher, and we did what needed to be done to ensure what we had been told needed to be ensured. The fire burned through the night and into the morning. We did not sleep. By the time the other 2 men returned from the lines, it was over, and we told them what had happened, and there was a long silence that none of us broke for some time. Now, here is what I need to tell you, because this is the part that has stayed with me. We never found what we expected to find. You understand what I mean? There are accounts, old accounts, things the Innu men had described of what the fire reveals when the thing inside someone has truly taken hold. What the heat draws out from the chest. What remains that should not remain. We built that fire large and we kept it burning, and we were thorough. Because Thomas had asked us to be thorough. Because Thomas was still Thomas when he asked, and that mattered to us. But there was nothing there that should not have been there. There was nothing that answered the question he had asked us to answer by our actions. I have thought about what that means for 47 years. It is possible it means nothing. It is possible the old accounts are imprecise, or that I misunderstood what I had been told to look for, or that the progression had not advanced far enough for the signs to be present. It is possible that Thomas was right, and that we arrived at the correct outcome before the outcome became undeniable. These are the possibilities I have tried to live inside of. But there is another possibility, and it is the one that comes to me most often in the cold months, in the hours before dawn, when the fire has burned low and the dark presses in from every direction. Thomas was sick. Thomas had a fever and perhaps some deeper ailment that the winter had drawn out of him. He was frightened, and he was isolated, and he had heard the same stories all of us had heard, and he lay in the dark for 6 nights listening to the sound of his own body and finding meanings in it. He dreamed violent dreams the way a sick man does, and he woke from them afraid, and he was a careful and conscientious man who did not want to be a danger to the people around him. And he asked us to listen, and we listened, and we heard what we feared, because we were also frightened and isolated, and it was February on the Rivière aux Outards, and the winter had a weight to it that year. And Thomas asked for what he asked for, and we gave it to him, because he asked us to, because he was afraid and we were afraid, and there was no one with more knowledge than us to say otherwise. No one to hold us back from what the fear was making sensible. The thing I have learned, if I have learned anything, is that the sickness and the fear of the sickness are not always possible to separate from the inside. Not by the person experiencing it, and not by the people watching. Thomas could not know with certainty what was happening to him. We could not know either. He made the decision that he made because he was a good man who did not want harm to come to others. We honored that decision because we trusted him and because we were afraid. Whether we were right is not a question I have been able to answer. I am not sure it is a question that can be answered, and I think that is the thing that does not leave, not the guilt of having done it, not even the grief, but the way certainty was never available to any of us, not to Thomas in his bunk in the dark, not to us standing around the fire afterward. You act inside what you know, and what you know is always less than what would be enough. That is the story. That is what Thomas asked for, and what we gave him, and what I have carried since. Go to sleep. The fire is still good. I'm writing this by a headlamp. The stove has been burning for 6 hours, and I cannot get warm. I need to set this down before I talk myself out of what I heard. Before the rational part of my brain, which has been working very hard tonight, convinces me that there is a clean explanation I somehow missed. There isn't. I know that now. But I am getting ahead of myself, and I need to go in order, because the order is the part that matters. My name is not important. What is important is that I have been coming to the Boundary Waters every January for 11 years, usually with my sister, once with my college roommate, twice alone. The canoe area in winter is not the same place it is in summer. It becomes something older. The portage trails are buried under 2 feet of snow, and you walk the frozen lakes instead, your sled trailing behind you. The only sound, the scratch of your skis on wind-scoured ice, and the occasional report of a tree cracking in the cold. There are no other people. In 11 years of winter trips, I have seen 3 other humans in the back country between November and March, and 2 of them were together. This trip, I'm alone. My sister had a conflict. Her daughter's school thing, nothing wrong. She tried to rearrange it, and I told her not to bother. I have done this solo before. I know the protocols. I filed a trip plan with the outfitter in Ely. I have a satellite communicator clipped to the chest strap of my pack. I have done everything right. The cabin I am using is a private lease on a small island on Knife Lake, about 9 miles from the nearest road. It is a good cabin. 1 room, wood stove, 2 bunks. I have been here before. It feels safe in the way that very old, very solid things feel safe. The logs are notched and fitted without gaps. The door fits its frame. The stove draws clean. I arrived 2 days ago. Yesterday I skied to the East Arm and back, 14 miles round trip, blue sky the whole way, temperature around -12. A good day, a very good day. Last night was clear, full moon or close enough, and the snow was throwing the light back up so that you could read outside if you needed to. I did not need to. I had eaten, stoked the stove, and was reading in my bunk when I heard my mother's voice. I want to be precise about this because precision is the only useful thing I have right now. I did not hear a sound that reminded me of my mother's voice. I did not hear something that could have been my mother's voice. I heard her voice, her specific voice, the pitch of it, the way she drops the end of her sentences just slightly, the particular sound of my name in her mouth, which is a thing that is different in everyone's voice, and I have known the sound of my name in her voice for 37 years. She called once. She said my name, and then she said honey, which she has called me since I was small. Just those 2 things. My name and honey. From outside, from the north, which is the lakeside of the island. I sat up in my bunk. My mother was, at that moment, in her house in St. Paul, 200 and some miles away. I knew this. I had spoken to her that morning on the satellite communicator. She was making soup, she said. She sounded fine. She was making soup and watching a documentary, and she told me to be careful out there, the way she always does, the way she has said it so many times that it has become its own kind of ritual. So I sat up, and I thought, sound carries strangely over ice. I have heard conversations across open lakes before, voices arriving crisp and clear from a source that turned out to be half a mile away. I thought, there are other people on the lake on a different island, and one of them has a voice that sounds, in the cold and the stillness, like my mother. I thought these things, and I believed them, mostly. Enough to stay in my bunk. Enough to go back to my book and read the same paragraph 4 times without retaining any of it. She called again, 40 minutes later. I know it was 40 minutes, because I checked the time the first time, and I checked it the second time, and the gap was exactly 40 minutes, which is another thing I have been sitting with tonight. What that interval means, whether it means anything. This time, she said my name, and then she said, "It's cold out here." I put my book down. "It's cold out here" is not a thing my mother says. It is grammatically fine and entirely plausible, and it is not a thing she says. My mother runs warm. She complains about heat, not cold. She keeps her house at 68 in January and says she could go lower. "It's cold out here" is not a phrase that lives in her, but also, and I'm trying to stay with this, the voice was still hers, not almost hers, not a simulation of hers, hers. The quality of it had not changed. Only the words were wrong, and the direction was wrong. I realized this while I was sitting there in my bunk. The first call had come from the lakeside, the north. But if someone were coming to this island, if someone had somehow followed my trip plan, borrowed a sled, skied 9 miles to find me, they would come from the South Portage Landing. That is the only reasonable approach. The north side of this island is open ice, and then a long crossing to a chain of smaller islands, and then the wilderness boundary. There is nothing north of me for a very long way. The second call had also come from the north. I did not go outside. I want to be clear about that. I did not go outside. I got up and put more wood on the stove. I did that first. Then I turned off my headlamp and stood at the cabin's single window, which faces south, and I looked at the tree line and the open snow between the trees and the cabin, and there was nothing there, just the moonlight and the shadows of the pines. Then the cold came. I do not know how else to describe it. The temperature in the cabin had been fine. The stove was running well. I was in a wool base layer, and I was warm. And then I was not warm. Not because the stove had failed. It had not. The stove was burning fine. I could see the red glow through the gap in the door. The cold that came was from outside the logic of the stove. It arrived like pressure, like the warmth was being displaced by something heavier. And underneath it, in the same moment, a smell, very faint. The cold was carrying it. Something that was not pine and was not lake water and was not the clean mineral smell of deep winter snow. Something older, something that had been closed away from air for a long time and was now in the open, like meat in a cellar, like a drawer that should not be opened. I took a step back from the window. I heard her again. Not her name, not this time, just her voice, wordless, a sound she makes when she is thinking about something, a soft sound between a hum and a murmur, a sound that is absolutely hers and absolutely private and has no reason to be in the mouth of anything that is not her. The sound was coming from the tree line, the south tree line, the one I was looking at. I could not see anything. The moonlight was good, but the shadows at the tree line were deep, and I could not see anything that should not have been there. But I was listening, not watching. I was listening for her to make the sound again. She did not make the sound again. What I heard instead was nothing, and I want to explain why that was worse. When you are alone in the boundary waters in January, you hear the cabin, the stove, the timber settling in the cold. You hear your own breathing. You hear small things, the shift of snow on the roof, the occasional crack of ice on the lake. You do not hear total silence. Total silence at -15 means that everything with senses has gone still. It means something in the area has made everything go still. I stood at the window for a long time. The edge of the clearing is not far from the cabin, 30 feet, maybe 35. In the moonlight, I could see the first row of trees clearly. The trunks, the gaps between them, the way the shadow deepened behind them. At some point, while I was standing there, I became aware that one of the shadows was not the right shape. It was at the far left of the tree line, close to where the island bends north, and it was vertical where the trees were also vertical. But the proportion was wrong. It was too narrow for a pine and the wrong texture. It was not moving. I watched it for a long time. It did not move. My mother's voice said my name one more time. From that shadow, in the same tone she uses when she is calling me for dinner, the same tone she used when I was 9 years old and summer was over and she needed me in from the yard. My name, that particular cadence, and then nothing. The shadow did not move. I went to my bunk. I pulled the sleeping bag around me. I did not take my eyes off the window for a very long time, and eventually the angle of my bunk made that impossible, and I lay in the dark and listened to the stove and waited for dawn. The cold eased sometime before first light. I do not know exactly when. I had been dozing in that shallow way where you are half inside a thought and half outside it. And when I came fully awake, the cold had lifted and the smell was gone and the silence had broken. I could hear a raven somewhere on the lake, and the stove had burned down to embers, and the cabin was merely cold instead of that other thing. At first light, I went outside. I did not want to. I want to say that clearly. I did not want to, and I went anyway because I needed to know. I walked to the tree line on the south side of the clearing. The snow was undisturbed, 4 inches of powder over a hard base, no crust, no wind that night to erase anything. Undisturbed. No tracks approaching from the south, no tracks from the north landing, no snowshoe prints, no ski trails, no boot holes, nothing. I walked the full perimeter of the island. At the north tree line, where the island bends and faces open ice, I found a place in the snow that I cannot explain. Not tracks, not holes. A depression, very shallow, very wide. The way snow sometimes compresses when something heavy has stood in it, but without the definition of any shape I could name. The depression was maybe 6 feet across. It was cold in a way I could feel through my boots, colder than the surrounding snow, and it smelled faintly of something I recognized from the night before. I did not stay there long. I am on my second day of the drive home now. Stopped in Duluth last night. Left early this morning. My hands were steady enough to drive by the time I reached Ely, but I sat in the truck for a while in the outfitter parking lot before I pulled onto the highway, which tells me something about how I was actually doing. My mother called this afternoon. She had seen the weather coming in and wanted to check my route. She sounded fine. She was making soup again, or maybe still, or maybe she makes soup every evening and I have never noticed. We talked for a few minutes, normal things. She said she was glad I was out of the cold. I did not tell her what happened. I thought about how I would start that conversation, and I could not find a beginning that would not frighten her. And frightening her accomplishes nothing now. And so we talked about soup, and I told her I would call her when I got home. And she said, "Be careful, honey." She said it exactly right. The cadence, the word, the quiet warmth underneath it. I said I would. I don't know if I will go back next January. I have been going for 11 years, and I have never once thought that before. The Boundary Waters does not belong less to me than it did. I know that. I know that whatever is out there, whatever learned her voice, or had always known it, and was waiting for a reason to use it, I know that it does not have jurisdiction over what the place is to me, but it knew her voice. It knew the private sound she makes when she is thinking. I keep coming back to that, and I do not know what to do with it. I'm going to call her when I get home. Like I said, I'm going to make sure she is there, in her house, in the warmth. I will not tell her why. Some things you carry alone. Nathan Bressett had built the mudroom addition himself, framed it over 3 weekends in late October before the ground hardened. He knew the way a structure was supposed to sit. Level, plumb, the small tolerances that added up over time. He noticed when something was off by a 1/4 inch. He noticed when a joist sang under weight and when it merely creaked. This was how he had always moved through the world, with attention, without drama, cataloguing the small sounds of things and filing them appropriately. The cabin was 14 miles from Lac du Flambeau. His grandfather had built the original 2 rooms. Nathan had expanded it twice, once in his 20s and once in his late 30s, and the additions showed his growing competence. Tighter seams, better insulation values, a passive solar angle on the south-facing windows that kept the heating bills down without his having to think about it. He had a workshop in the back where he did finish carpentry for clients in Minocqua and Eagle River. Good work, steady enough. He was 43, and he had learned to find comfort in the adequacy of things. The winter had been difficult, not the snow. He had no quarrel with snow. But what came with it? His mother in December, his long-time dog in January, a contract that fell through in February, which meant the quiet in the workshop lasted longer than he would have chosen. He was not a man who talked about these things. He had people he could call. He simply did not call them. By March, the cold had stopped feeling like weather and started feeling like a condition. He noticed the food first. He had venison in the freezer, a doe he had taken in November, processed himself, wrapped carefully in butcher paper with the date and cut written in his own hand. He had been eating from it all winter without difficulty. In the 3rd week of March, he defrosted a package of backstrap and set it to marinate overnight. And in the morning, when he opened the refrigerator, the smell of it made him set one hand flat against the counter and breathe through his nose for a long moment. He was not sick. He had no fever. His stomach was not upset in any way he could identify. The smell was simply wrong, in a way that had no category. He covered the bowl and put it back and ate crackers instead and told himself it was the marinade, that he had used too much of something. 3 days later, he tried eggs. The eggs were fine. He fried them the way he always did and ate them standing at the counter and felt nothing unusual. That evening, he tried the venison again, plain this time, just salt, and he got as far as cutting a piece before his throat closed, and he stood there with the fork hovering and understood that he was not going to be able to eat it. He put the plate in the refrigerator. He ate nothing else. He went to bed and slept poorly and dreamed of something moving through trees at a distance that he could not measure, a silhouette that was wrong in its proportions, too tall and too narrow, the limbs at angles that the cold had made strange. He woke and did not write the dream down because he was not the kind of man who wrote dreams down, but he remembered it. The thermometer was a simple analog dial mounted to the workshop wall, the kind with a red needle and a range from -40 to 120. He had owned it for 15 years. It had never given him cause to doubt it. He was working on cabinet doors when he noticed the needle had dropped. He had the wood stove running, and the workshop held heat well. It was insulated above code, his own doing, and the temperature when he had checked at 9 in the morning was 61 degrees. Comfortable. He had been working for perhaps 20 minutes when he stopped to retrieve a clamp from the far wall and glanced at the dial and stopped. 57 degrees. He stood looking at it. The stove was burning steady. He could hear it, could see the glow through the isinglass window. He had not opened a door. There was no draft he could feel. He checked the stove damper, and it was set correctly, the airflow right. He went back to work. 15 minutes later, he checked again. 53 degrees. He set down the clamp. He stood in the middle of the workshop and he was not cold. He noticed that specifically, that he was not cold, that his body was producing warmth correctly, and the air in the room was not cold on his skin. But the needle said 53, and it had been 61 40 minutes ago, and nothing in the room accounted for it. He thought about it the way he would think about a structural problem. He looked for the cause. He checked the stovepipe for a blockage. He checked the window sills. He walked the perimeter of the space, pressing his palm to the wall panels and feeling for cold. The walls were fine. The stove was fine. He went back inside, and he did not go back to the workshop that day. He knew the law. He had grown up with it the way you grow up with the names of plants and what they were used for. Not as superstition, not as religion, just as information embedded in the people around him, passed through ordinary conversation. His grandmother had known a woman whose husband was treated in the 1940s, a long time ago, but not so long that the knowledge had gone anywhere. He sat at the kitchen table that evening with his phone face down, and he thought carefully through what he knew, the hunger for meat that the body rejects. He had not experienced the hunger, only the aversion, but they could come in different sequences. He knew this, the cold that originates from inside rather than outside. He tested this. He pressed his palm to his sternum and held it there for a moment. The warmth of his hand felt wrong against his chest, not wrong in a dramatic way, but wrong in the way a measurement is wrong when the instrument is calibrated correctly and still gives you a number that does not match the room. The dreams of something moving at distance. He sat with these three things for a long time. Then he pressed his left ear to the inside of his forearm, the way he would press an ear to a wall to listen for pipes. He held still. He controlled his breathing so that his own exhalations would not interfere. He heard it, not loudly, not in a way he could have described easily to someone else. But there was a sound in his arm, below the pulse, below the ordinary sounds of a body working, a fine sound, high and faint, the sound of something thin and rigid adjusting to pressure. He lifted his head and sat with his hands on the table. He was not panicking. He noticed this about himself, the absence of panic, and recognized it as either steadiness or something worse, the calm that came when a part of you had already accepted the thing you were still trying to process consciously. He thought about the window. He knew there was a window. He knew it from the same place he knew everything else, passed through without drama by people who had needed to know it. Early stage, symptoms present, intervention possible. The cure existed. It required duck fat or bear fat, administered correctly, and it required another person, someone who knew what they were doing. Because the thing that came out of you in the process was not nothing, and you could not manage it alone. He thought about his cousin Darla. She lived 40 minutes north, outside Odena. She was a practical woman. She had trained as a nurse, worked at the clinic in Ashland for 12 years. She knew the law, knew it better than he did, because she had made a point of knowing it, because she thought it was important to keep knowing it. She would not panic either. He picked up his phone. He set it face down on the table. The thing he could not find a clean way around was what it would mean to tell her. Not the telling itself. Darla was not someone who would make it into more than it was, would not perform alarm at him or ask him to perform anything back. She would just listen, and then she would figure out what to do. He trusted this about her completely. What he could not find a clean way around was the part that came after. If he called her and told her, and she came, and she would come, he knew she would, same day, no argument. Then they would both have to sit with the fact of what was happening to him, and what it meant about what he had let himself become over this winter. The isolation, the months of not calling anyone, of finding the silence easier than the effort of words. He could see with the same clear attention he gave to structures and sounds and the tolerances of things, that the winter had not simply been difficult, that he had let it become something. The winter did not have to be. He had been alone in a specific way, a way that opened a door he had not intended to open. This was not self-pity. It was just measurement. He picked up the phone again. He found Darla's contact. His thumb was on the call button. He thought about the sound in his arm, that fine, high, adjusting sound. He thought about the needle on the workshop thermometer, dropping 4 degrees in 20 minutes in a room with no draft. He thought about how the window was finite. He knew this too. He did not know exactly how much time he had. The accounts were not precise on that. What they were precise on was that there came a point past which precision no longer mattered, and he was a man who dealt in precision, who had built his whole life around the ability to measure and correct. And he understood, sitting at the kitchen table with his phone in his hand, that if he missed this window, he would not get to be that man anymore. He would still be walking around. He would still be recognizable to people who knew him. But the man who noticed the tolerances, who heard the small sounds of things and filed them appropriately, that man required something that he could feel, sitting very still in his kitchen, going quiet inside his chest. He pressed call. It rang 4 times. He stood at the window while it rang and looked out at the yard where the snow was still heavy between the trees. The tree line was dark. The sky above it held the particular grey of late afternoon in deep winter, flat and without depth, the kind of sky that made the distance between things hard to read. He was looking at the tree line when the call went to voicemail. He stood there with the phone warm against his ear, listening to Darla's recorded voice telling him to leave a message. Outside, between the birches at the edge of the yard, something altered the way the shadows fell. He was not certain he had seen it. He was a man who did not see things that were not there. He had always been this, had always been the person who trusted the instrument over the impression. But the shadows were different than they had been. He listened to the beep. I have spent a significant portion of my adult life in places that most people would describe as remote: bog forests in the thumb of Michigan, gravel bars along rivers in the western UP, a stretch of boreal scrubland outside of Wawa, Ontario, where the only sign of other humans for 4 days was a rusted fuel drum someone had left to sink into the moss. I mention this not to establish credentials, but because it matters to what happened, or rather, to why I spent so long failing to understand what I was seeing. I was not a person who frightened easily in wild places. I was not a person who saw things. I went out, I observed, I came back. That was the structure of my work, and I had trusted it for 15 years. The cabin I rented was 12 miles outside of a town small enough that the gas station was also the post office, and also, on weekends, a taxidermy shop. I had booked it for 3 weeks, late October into mid-November, the transition window between autumn colour and first hard freeze, which produces a particular quality of light I'd been wanting to document. The cabin itself was unremarkable. Clapboard siding gone grey with weather, a wood stove that drew well, a front porch facing northwest across a meadow that opened for about 200 meters before meeting the tree line, tamarack and black spruce at the edge, then denser balsam fir further back, the whole mass of it going dark by 3 in the afternoon, once the sun dropped behind the ridge. It was good working country. I set up my kit the first evening and went to bed early, satisfied. The second morning, I was on the porch by 6:30, before full light, drinking coffee and letting the meadow come into focus. The grass had gone the color of old straw. There was a rime of frost on the seed heads that caught the low, early sun well, and I was thinking about angle and aperture, not about anything else. That was when I noticed it at the tree line. My first thought was moose. The shape was tall, very tall, taller than any moose I had seen, and I have seen moose in this same region of Michigan. But the mind assembles what it knows from what it perceives, and moose was the category that reached for that height. I put the binoculars on it. It was not a moose. It was upright and very thin. The thinness was the first thing that registered as wrong, not because thin things don't exist in nature, but because the proportions were off in a way I could not immediately specify. Too much height, not enough breadth. Standing at the edge of the tamaracks, where the tree cover thinned, perfectly still in the way that large animals are sometimes still before they bolt. That collected, muscular stillness that means readiness, except it didn't bolt. I watched it for 11 minutes by my watch. It did not move. The frost was melting off the meadow grass in a slow drift of vapor, and the light was shifting, and the thing at the tree line did not move at all. Not a shift of weight, not a turn of the head, nothing. I went inside and got my camera with the 500mm and came back, and it was still there. The photographs I took that first morning are difficult to describe accurately. What I can say is that when I reviewed them in the field on the camera's screen, the images did not match what I was seeing through the viewfinder. The scale felt wrong on the screen, in a way I attributed to the compression of the long lens, a known artifact. The shape was blurry in a way I attributed to atmospheric heat shimmer, which exists in cold air too, especially over frost. I told myself both these things and believed them because they were true things and because I was a person who looked for true explanations. I went inside and made more coffee and consulted my field guides and came up empty. By the time I came back out, it was gone. The second morning, it was in the same position. I logged the time, 6:47 a.m. I noted the position relative to a distinctive snag at the tree line edge that I was using as a reference point. I took more photographs. I watched it for 35 minutes before the cold drove me inside. It did not move in those 35 minutes. Not once. At no point did it appear to breathe in any visible way. No fogging of breath in the cold air, which I noticed around the 20-minute mark and wrote down without yet understanding what that observation meant. The third morning, I drove into town. I had a practical question I wanted to ask. Whether there was any large animal in the region I might be underestimating. A Kodiak bear introduced somewhere. A breeding elk population I wasn't aware of. Something that could account for that height, standing upright. The woman behind the counter at the gas station listened to my description politely. She asked a clarifying question. Where exactly on the property was the tree line I was describing? Which direction did it face? When I told her northwest, something passed through her expression that I can only describe as a careful neutrality, a decision being made about what to say. She told me she wasn't sure what I might have seen. She said the woods in that direction were very old. I asked what she meant by that. She said the forest up that ridge was one of the oldest stands in the county, that some of the firs in there were over 200 years, and that sometimes old forest did things that newer forest didn't. Sounds carried differently. Light moved differently. She said it in a way that was clearly not the thing she was actually thinking. I tried a different approach. I asked if there were any local traditions or stories about that part of the woods. The careful neutrality again. She said people had their own ways of understanding the land up here, and she wasn't the right person to speak to that. She said it gently, and she said it finally, in the way that closes a door without slamming it. A man filling a coffee cup at the counter had gone very still during this conversation and did not look up once. When I left, he and the woman exchanged 3 words in voices too low to catch. I drove back to the cabin. It was there that afternoon, which was unusual. The first 2 mornings I had seen it only in early light. That afternoon, I came out onto the porch at 2 o'clock, an hour before the sun dropped behind the ridge, and it was at the tree line again. Same position, same absolute stillness. And something else, a smell I had not registered in the mornings, which I attributed to wind direction. The smell was wrong for the landscape. Rot is not unusual in late autumn, and I did not process it as unusual at first. But this was not leaf litter, not bog decay, not the clean rot of something dead in the open air. It was thicker than that, and it had a quality that I cannot precisely name, except to say that it seemed to come from somewhere the cold could not reach. I raised the binoculars and looked at it directly, from the front, from where I was standing with it facing the cabin. It resolved into something I could almost categorize, a shape, vertical, very tall, limbs that were too long relative to the torso, and held in a way that suggested they had once had more substance than they currently did. A face I could not resolve at that distance, and was grateful I could not resolve. I was looking at it, and it was looking at me, and there was an attentiveness in the looking that had nothing to do with the flicker of animal awareness, that thing a deer does when it notices you across a field. This was different. This was the quality of attention you feel when you're being studied by something that has been waiting long enough to have shed every trace of impatience. I lowered the binoculars and went inside. That evening, I checked the photographs again. I noticed for the first time that the images from the morning showed it slightly closer to the snag reference point than the images from 2 mornings before. Or the snag had moved, which snags do not do. I told myself parallax. I told myself I was not accounting for my own position on the porch varying by a few feet morning to morning. I told myself several things. I stayed for the full 3 weeks. I don't know entirely why. Part of it was stubbornness. I had a project to complete, and I completed it. Part of it was something else that I have not found an accurate word for. The shape appeared most mornings and some afternoons. I documented it as I would document anything. I changed nothing about my routine. On the days it appeared in the afternoon, the smell was always present, and I began to time its arrival, always within an hour of the shape's appearance from the northwest, even when the visible wind was from the south. That is a small fact. I do not know what to do with it. What I know is that I drove home in mid-November with 1,400 photographs on 3 memory cards and a project I considered professionally successful. I did not look at the images from the tree line carefully until I had been home for 2 weeks. I had other work, and I think also I was not yet ready to look at them in the way I needed to look at them. When I did, I sorted them by date and time and went through them slowly, the way I go through any series where I'm looking for something I can't yet name. It took me until the 3rd session to see it. From the front, from the images where I had the camera pointed directly at the shape, the thing resolved. Blurry, yes. Scale compressed by the lens, yes. But there, a shape, a height, something to look at. From the side, it was not there. I do not mean it had moved or turned away. I mean that in the photographs where I had shifted position on the porch and the angle of view changed, even slightly, 10 or 15 degrees off center, the shape diminished. Not in the way that a tree thins when you move around it. In a way I do not have the optics language to describe correctly, as if the object had no depth at all, as if it existed only in the plane directly facing me, as if it was something drawn on the air and not a thing standing in space. There are 847 photographs from the tree line across those 3 weeks. In the 214 photographs where my position on the porch was off-center, the shape is faint or absent. In the 633 photographs taken from near center, it is present. I have measured the angles. I have consulted 2 colleagues who work in optics and photography about whether there is a lens artifact or atmospheric phenomenon that would produce this result consistently. Neither of them has a satisfying explanation. I have looked at these images a great many times now. I have booked the same cabin for next November. The owner confirmed the reservation last week. When I tried to examine my reasoning for this, I find it is not reasoning exactly. It is something closer to the feeling that a question has been asked and I have not yet answered it, and that the question is still there, waiting. It will still be there. I have a strong sense of this, though I cannot tell you where the sense comes from. I have told myself that I am going back to gather better data, more controlled shooting positions, a wider baseline, a second camera on a fixed mount to eliminate the variable of my own movement on the porch. I have told myself this is a scientific question, and I am a person who answers scientific questions. I think about the woman at the gas station and the way she said the woods in that direction were very old. I think about what it means for a woods to be old. I think about what things have time to become in 200 years of standing in place, watching. I haven't told anyone I'm going back. Day 1, November 4th. Weather grounded the helicopter this morning. Pilot radioed from Shefferville that the front moved faster than forecast. Gusts at the survey site. Visibility near zero. No safe window for the next 48 hours. We have acknowledged and begun protocol for an extended stay. Team present. Myself, Mia Harstad, lead geologist. Reiko Tanaka, environmental assessment. Dave Cormier, logistics, camp. And Tomas Reyes, field photography, secondary survey. We are camped at the secondary waypoint, grid reference NQ7714, approximately 112 kilometers northeast of the Shefferville base. We have the winter tent, the stove, fuel for 16 days at standard consumption. Rations calculated at 2 weeks stretched, possibly 3 if we are careful with the proteins. The situation is inconvenient, but not dangerous. We have redundant communication. I have reported our status to the project coordinator in Montreal. We will continue documentation work from camp as conditions allow. The delay is frustrating. I had a meeting in Quebec City on the 8th. Day 5, November 8th. Weather has not broken. We have had 2 brief radio contacts with Shefferville. Signal is intermittent, the storm system larger than projected. The pilot estimates another 4 to 6 days. This pushes us into territory where rations require active management. I have reorganized our food inventory. I have assigned daily portions. Cormier objected, mildly, not seriously. And I explained the arithmetic. He understood. We are professionals. Reiko has been quieter than usual. She says it is the confinement. I note it here because I have noticed. She has been sleeping more than the others and waking differently. Slow to orient, looking around the tent as though checking that we are all where she left us. I asked if she was sleeping well. She said yes. Day 9, November 12th. The first incident with Reiko occurred at approximately 2 in the morning. I was awake. The cold had shifted, a change in the wind through the tent wall, and I heard her. It began as sound, without identifiable content. Then it became a word, repeated, though I could not make out which word. Then she was screaming. Dav woke and went to her first. By the time she was conscious and sitting up, she was gasping, shaking her head, saying she was fine. She did not remember what the dream was about. She said this with the confidence of someone who remembered exactly what the dream was about and did not want to say. I have noted this for the record. 1 incident. Stress response, plausibly. Confinement. Reduced caloric intake can affect sleep architecture. Day 12, November 15. 3 additional incidents since the last entry. The screaming now comes in a pattern. Not every night, but close. Each time Reiko says she does not remember the dream. Each time she is slower to return to sleep, lying with her eyes open, very still. She has stopped eating her full portions. I asked her about it directly this morning, just the two of us at the stove. She was quiet for a long moment, and then said she kept dreaming about hunger. She said that in the dreams she was very, very hungry, and that the hunger was not like ordinary hunger. It was a hunger that felt like it had a direction, like it knew what it wanted. She stopped herself there. She looked at me and then looked away. I recorded this in her welfare log. I have increased her portion allocation by a small amount. We can manage the adjustment. Day 14, November 17th. No radio contact today. Tried 3 times at standard intervals. Will attempt again at 0600 tomorrow. Reiko is not eating the increased portion. I found most of it discarded behind the equipment bag. When I confronted her, she said the food tasted wrong. That everything tasted like it was wrong. Not spoiled, but wrong, in a way she could not explain. She said even the smell of the stove, the fuel smell, was nauseating to her. She has lost weight visibly in 2 weeks. Her face looks different. The muscles at her jaw look different, tighter, more defined, as though she is clenching something. She slept away from the group last night, at the far end of the tent. She said she was cold and wanted to be closer to the outer wall. I did not challenge this. Day 17, November 20th. We made contact with Shefferville. The helicopter is grounded for at least another 10 days. The storm system has stalled. The project coordinator is aware. We are to conserve and wait. I have recalculated rations. The situation is now serious. We are 3 weeks into a trip planned for 1. And if the helicopter cannot reach us before the end of the month, we will face a genuine shortfall. I have told the team. Cormier took it badly, briefly, then recovered. Thomas did not say anything. He has been saying very little this week. Reiko was asleep when I told them. She sleeps a great deal now. When she is awake, she sits outside the tent sometimes, in the cold, and when I check on her, she says she feels better out here, that the air helps. I do not push her on this. Her muscles along her forearms and throat have a quality I find difficult to describe. When she stands, she is very still before she moves, like something is preparing itself to move. I'm likely reading too much into this. I'm under stress. We all are. Day 19, November 22nd. I have not written in 2 days. I will write what I know. Reiko began screaming at midnight 2 nights ago and did not stop. It was not the same as the previous episodes. It lasted a long time. When she was finally quiet, she was not awake and not asleep. Dav stayed with her. Thomas left the tent, and I do not know where he went or how long he was gone. In the morning, Reiko was gone. We searched for 4 hours. There was no track that made sense given the snow conditions. I will not speculate further in this entry. The welfare log for Reiko Tanaka has been closed. Day 21, November 24th. Rations. The food situation has changed. I will record this plainly. On day 20, we located a protein source that was not in the original inventory. I will not record further specifics here. The situation required a decision, and the decision was made, and we are no longer in immediate shortfall. I am confident we can last until extraction. Dav did not participate in the preparation. He helped. He did not eat. I ate. Tomas ate. The taste was not wrong, the way Reiko described things tasting wrong. The taste was ordinary. That is what I remember most clearly, that it was very ordinary. Day 22, November 25th. I dreamed last night. I do not remember the content. I remember the hunger, though, the direction of it. I have noted this for the record. Day 24, November 27th. Dav is gone. I will not record the details of the circumstances. The welfare log for Dav Cormier has been closed. I have noted that since day 21, my sleep has been very good, deep and dark and long. I wake refreshed. My muscles feel strong, stronger than they should, given the weeks of restricted diet before the food situation was resolved. The cold that I felt through the tent wall in the early weeks, the cold that woke me, does not trouble me the same way now. It feels like my cold, like it is coming from somewhere inward and matching the outside air, and the two have found an agreement. I am recording this because I believe accurate records matter. Day 25, November 28th. I have been reviewing my earlier entries. The handwriting in the first 2 weeks is identifiably mine. I recognize the particular way I form my sevens, the slight leftward lean on capital letters. The handwriting in the entries after day 20 is also mine, I believe, but there is something in the pressure of it. Like I was pressing harder without knowing I was pressing harder, like something need to make certain the mark stayed. I do not feel unwell. I want to be clear in this record that I do not feel unwell. I feel more functional than I have in weeks. The fatigue that was accumulating through the ration restriction seems to have lifted entirely. I completed a full inventory of remaining supplies this morning, sorted and catalogued everything that remains, which is more than I expected. The math works now. We can last until extraction. Tomas watched me work the inventory. He did not offer to help. He has not eaten today that I have seen. He says his appetite is off. I know what that means. I have watched it progress in someone before, but I have not said anything to him about it. I have left his portion within reach and not pressed him. There is nothing to be done about appetite when it goes in that direction, except wait. The dreams are very regular now. I do not scream. I lie still, and the dream fills in, and when I wake, I'm calm in a way the sleep used to never make me. I wrote earlier that the hunger in the dream had a direction. That is still accurate. It knows what it is for. I do not find this upsetting. I am noting my own symptoms here because I am a scientist, and because accurate records matter more the less you understand what is happening to you. Day 26, November 29th. Tomas and I do not talk much now. This is not unfriendly. We are both conserving. We are both waiting for the helicopter. He has begun looking at me differently. I notice it when I catch him not looking away fast enough. I am not sure what he sees. I have not looked at my reflection in several days. There is no mirror, and the conditions do not make it easy, but also I have not been particularly curious about it. This seems normal to me. I feel very calm. I have not felt this calm in years, perhaps not ever. There is something clarifying about extended cold and extended quiet. I think I will find the adjustment back to the city difficult. The noise will be a problem, all the warmth and the noise. Day 28, December 1st. The helicopter came this morning. There were 2 of them, a rescue aircraft and a smaller one behind it. They had a medic, a coordinator from the Montreal office, and two people I did not recognize. They seemed surprised by my condition. I am not sure what they expected. I have been taking care of myself. I told them I was not sure it had been as long as 28 days. It did not feel that long to me. The coordinator wrote something down. They asked about the others. I gave them the welfare logs. They asked additional questions that I answered accurately. The medic checked my temperature twice and then looked at a colleague. I asked what he found. He said I was running a little cold. He did not explain further. Tomas was airlifted separately. I do not know what he told them. I am writing this final entry in the aircraft on the way back to Shefferville. The medic gave me a foil blanket, the kind that reflects heat back toward the body. I have set it aside. It is not uncomfortable, exactly, but I do not seem to need it the way they expected me to. The landscape from the aircraft window is very white and very still. I thought looking at it would make me feel something about what those 28 days were. Grief, maybe, or relief. I feel mostly that it is very beautiful, that white country down there, that I understand it now in a way I did not before. My handwriting looks different in this entry. I notice it as I go. The letters are the right shape, but they are pressed harder into the page, and there is something slightly wrong with the spacing, as though my hand has had to relearn the width of each character. This is likely fatigue. Fine motor tasks after prolonged physical stress often show minor degradation. I am warm enough. I am comfortable. Wherever they take me, I do not think the cold will bother me much. I do not think it will bother me at all. The following accounts were collected in the winter of 1931 by Elias Drummond, a researcher employed by the Department of Indian Affairs to document what the departmental record described with the blunt economy of government paperwork as a disturbance of a criminal nature occurring near the Pakitawagan post in the winter of 1902. Drummond spent 11 weeks in the region, conducted interviews through 2 interpreters, and returned with 4 testimonies, 3 of which he judged sufficiently coherent for transcription. His notes indicate that he found the accounts difficult to reconcile, not because the witnesses contradicted one another on the facts, which they did not, but because each witness identified a different moment as the worst of it, and Drummond could not determine which of them was right. He died in 1938 without publishing the material. The transcriptions were found in a box among his effects and passed to the university archive, where they remained uncatalogued for many years. They are reproduced here as Drummond left them, with minor corrections to spelling and punctuation. His framing notes, written in pencil on separate sheets, are included as found. H. Laverly was a trader, 54 years old at the time of Drummond's interview. He was stationed at the post that winter, he said. He had been at the post for 11 years and considered himself a practical man, not given to stories. He said this twice, without prompting, as though he needed it understood before anything else he said could be heard properly. The first night he heard it, he thought it was a man. That was the reasonable thing to think. A man, he assumed, who had come out from the trapline early and was calling toward the cabins. The voice came from the direction of the tree line, perhaps 200 yards north of the post buildings. It was dark by 4 in the afternoon that time of year, and there was a hard wind off the lake that made the sound come and go. He stood at the window and listened. It called a name. He did not recognize the name at first. It was a name from the community, not a name he used, but he heard it clearly enough. Then it called another, then a third. It called them in order, he said. He did not know what order. He only knew that it felt like order, like something working through a list it had prepared. He went to the door and opened it. The cold came in hard, and he stood for a moment, looking north toward the trees. He could see nothing. The voice had stopped. When he turned to go back inside, he found that 3 of the community's dogs, which usually slept against the post wall, had pressed themselves into the far corner of the yard, as far from the tree line as the fence allowed. They were not barking. They were completely silent, which he said was the thing he remembered longest afterward. He had heard dogs bark at wind, bark at moose, bark at their own shadows. He had never heard them go that quiet. He went inside and barred the door. He told Drummond he did not know why he barred it. He said it felt like the right thing to do, the way that certain things feel right without being explainable. The voice came again, later, and then again, 2 nights after that. By the 3rd night, the people from the community were no longer going out after dark. Monsieur Brightnose was a community member, 61 years old at the time of Drummond's interview. She had known the shaman. She did not give his name, and Drummond notes that neither interpreter pressed her for it, since she was a young woman. She described him as a man who carried things carefully. That was the phrase the interpreter gave Drummond, and Drummond noted that it seemed right to him, though he could not have explained why. The shaman's son had gone out to check a trapline 2 weeks before the voice began. He had come back, but he had come back wrong. She said this without elaboration for a long moment. Then she said, he came back hungry. Not hungry in the way of a man who had been out too long and missed meals. She could not describe it precisely, except to say that the hunger was the first thing you noticed when you looked at him, the way a fever is the first thing you notice in a person, even before you have touched them. He sat in the wrong place in the cabin. He asked about people who had left the community years ago, naming them as though they were still present. He woke before the light and stood at the wall facing north. The shaman did not speak about it directly. That was not how things worked. But the community knew, she said. Communities always know. They had known before with other people, and the knowledge was the same each time. The texture of it, the way conversations would shift when the person entered a room, the way children would move to the other side of their mothers without being told. There were discussions she was not part of, she said. She did not know all that was said, but she knew when the decision was made because the shaman's face changed. Not visibly. She was not certain she could explain this to a man like Drummond. She said, it is a thing you see in someone when they have accepted something they would have given anything not to accept. On the 4th night of the voice, she heard it call the shaman's name. She was inside when it happened, but the walls of the cabin were not thick, and the night was quiet except for the wind. She heard the voice, and then she heard it call the shaman's name. And then she heard it use a name she recognized as the name of the shaman's wife, who had died 14 years before. She had not heard that name spoken aloud in many years. She said she could not explain to Drummond what it felt like to hear it spoken in that voice from that direction. The shaman went out the following evening. He went alone, which was how it had to be. She did not watch him go. She heard him speak briefly to someone. She thought it might have been his daughter. She was not certain. And then she heard the door. And then she heard nothing. What they heard later, from inside the buildings, she would not describe in full. She said only that it went on for some time, and that at one point she heard the voice say something that was not a name, but was the shape of a name, a word that was almost a word. And then there was no more voice. They found the fire still going when they went out after. They found other things. She did not describe those things either. The shaman came back inside before morning. She saw him briefly, she said. He sat down near the stove, and he did not speak, and she brought him tea, and he held the cup, and she did not ask him anything. He drank the tea, and he held the cup a long time after it was empty. T. Keeter was a community member, 38 years old, at the time of Drummond's interview. He had been young when it happened, he said. Maybe 13 or 14. He said he was not sure he should be talking about it, and Drummond notes that the man spent the first 20 minutes of their conversation discussing entirely unrelated subjects before he spoke about the winter of 1902 at all. He said he had seen the shaman 3 days after, not 2 days. He was specific about this. But 3. The shaman was sitting outside on a clear morning on a piece of firewood someone had left near the door. He was just sitting, not doing anything, looking at something in the middle distance that Keeter could not see. Keeter said he almost walked past. Then something made him stop. He stood and looked at the shaman for a moment, and the shaman looked at him, and Keeter said that was the moment he understood something that he had not had words for as a child, and that he was not sure he had words for now. The shaman's expression was not grief, not quite. It was something adjacent to grief, something that looked like a man who has carried a thing over a great distance and has set it down and realizes the setting down is not the relief he was told it would be. The shaman said something to him, Keeter said. He said it quietly, in a way that was not quite directed at Keeter, or not entirely. The interpreter translated the phrase for Drummond as something close to, "It was the right thing, and that is the worst part of it." Keeter said the shaman was taken away by the authorities not long after. He did not know all the details. He knew the shaman went with them without arguing, which was not because he was afraid of them, but because Keeter thought he was too tired to resist anything anymore. He had used whatever he had for resisting things on something else, on a particular night in the dark, and there was nothing left for smaller matters. Keeter said he thought about the shaman a great deal over the years. He said he had known many men who carried hard things and carried them differently. He did not think the shaman was broken by it, exactly. He thought the shaman had been, and here the interpreter paused for a long moment before offering a word. He thought the shaman had been completed by it, the way a tool is completed when it has been used for the thing it was made for and will never be quite the same afterward. He said he did not mean that as a comfort. He said he was not sure it was a comfort at all. From E. Drummond's notes, dated February 1931. I have read these accounts many times now, here in this cold room. and I am no longer certain I read them for the purposes of research. The three witnesses agree on the essential facts. They agree on the voice, on its knowledge of names and private things, on the sequence of nights and the manner of the shaman's going out. They agree that it had to be done. None of them dispute this. What they do not agree on, what I cannot reconcile, is which moment was the one that mattered most. Laverly cannot get past the dogs. He returns to it unprompted, the way a man returns to the thing he least understands, the silence of them. Brightnose goes back to the name, the dead wife's name used by something in the trees, spoken aloud in a voice she recognized as her friend's son's voice, but not his voice. Not quite. The shape of a familiar thing wearing the wrong face. Keita goes back to the morning, 3 days later. The man sitting outside on a piece of firewood with a cup of cold tea. The particular quality of an exhaustion that has no bottom. I do not know which of them has identified the center of the thing. Perhaps none of them. Perhaps the center is somewhere in the spaces between their accounts, in the hours they could not speak about, or the words they did not have. Perhaps it cannot be located from outside. Perhaps it can only be known from inside it, in the dark, with a fire going, and whatever decision has to be made still ahead of you. The shaman was taken by Canadian authorities on an unrelated matter the following spring. The record indicates he was transported south, that he was tried, and that he died before his case was concluded. His brother died in custody sometime later. The departmental file is brief on this, in the way that departmental files are always brief on things that are not departmental in nature. I do not know what to do with the thing I have been given here. It is not the story I came to collect. Or rather, it is, but it is too large for the container I brought for it. The accounts sit on my table. I am not ready to close the folder. The following letters were recovered from the Koyukuk River Territorial Supply Post in the spring of 1905. The station had been established the previous year by the Northern Interior Trade Consortium to serve trappers operating in the upper drainage. Postfactor Edmund Carver, age 41, had operated similar posts in the Yukon and in Manitoba prior to his Alaska appointment. He was regarded by his employer as a precise and reliable correspondent. He kept records conscientiously. He is not known to have been given to embellishment. November 3rd, 1904. To Mr. Aldous Brennan, Northern Interior Trade Consortium, Fairbanks. I write to confirm that the Koyukuk post is now fully operational for the season. The supply lines came in ahead of the first hard freeze, which was fortunate, and we are provisioned through March, assuming no extraordinary circumstances. The woodpile is adequate. The two main structures are sound. My crew for this season consists of 4 men. Thomas Hale, whom you will remember from the 40-mile post, serves as my primary trapper and handles the line work north of the river. Aldous Marsh and George Pickford are the 2 general hands, responsible for the wood cutting, hauling, and building maintenance. The 4th man is a French-Canadian named Remy Coursel, who arrived with strong references from a Hudson's Bay factor in Quebec and has proven himself capable in the first weeks. We also have the assistance of an Athabascan man named Peter Ekwok, whose family has trapped this country for generations. He arrived 2 weeks before the rest of us and helped me cite the secondary cache correctly. He speaks good English. He is not a formal employee of the consortium, but I pay him from my discretionary account, as his knowledge of this territory is worth more than any map. He has lived here. The land has not been abstract to him the way it is to us. The country is beautiful and severe. I do not say that to be literary. I say it because it bears on everything that follows. A man who has not been in the interior in January cannot understand how entirely the darkness owns the hours. By 3 in the afternoon, the light is gone. By 5, you have forgotten what it looked like. Respectfully, Edmund Carver, Factor. November 21st, 1904. To Mr. Aldous Brennan. All routine. Thomas's line is producing well. Beaver primarily, some mink along the lower creek. Marsh and Pickford have the secondary woodpile nearly doubled from where I had it planned, which gives me confidence about February. Corso has proved to be a better cook than advertised, which has done more for crew morale than any other single factor. The men are in good spirits. They have settled into the rhythms of the post without complaint, and I am cautiously optimistic about the season ahead. I mention one small peculiarity only because I record everything. On the night of the 18th, sometime after 10 o'clock, something struck the outer wall of the main building. We heard the impact clearly, a solid sound, not a branch cracking or the pop of cold wood. When I went out the following morning, I found a short-handled hatchet lying in the snow against the east wall. It was not one of ours. I have inventoried all tools. The hatchet was old, the handle wrapped in a strip of what appeared to be canvas, and the head showed extensive use. It was not something that blew in. It had been thrown or placed there. I showed it to Peter. He looked at it for a long moment. He said he would ask around among the people he knew in the territory and find out if anyone had lost such a tool. He seemed to me at the time to be choosing his words with some care, though I cannot say why I had that impression. I have kept the hatchet. It is in the supply room on the shelf above the second window. Respectfully, Edmund Carver, Factor. December 2nd, 1904. To Mr. Aldous Brennan. The second occurrence happened on the evening of November 28th. It was full dark by 4 o'clock. We were inside at supper when something heavy struck the east wall again, harder than before, a sound like a fist against a door. Remy went out immediately with a lamp, thinking it might be a traveller in distress. He found nothing in the yard. Against the wall he found a tin kettle, battered, partially crushed on one side, as if from the force of the throw. The bale was intact. The kettle was empty. I showed it to Peter. His reaction this time was different. He did not pick it up. He stood back from it slightly, and he looked at me with an expression I cannot describe precisely, except to say that it was the expression of a man confirming something he had hoped not to confirm. He said, and I write this exactly as he said it, that in his experience things thrown from the dark were not lost accidentally. He said that when something in this country wanted to show you it was present, it used objects because that was the grammar of it. He said that a kettle was specific. He said that people in his family did not let a kettle sound in the woods go unremarked. I asked him what that meant. He said he needed to think. That evening, he moved his sleeping area from the corner he had occupied to a position closer to the stove. I noted it, but said nothing. The temperature dropped 12 degrees that night. The stove was well fueled. I could not account for the cold. Respectfully, Edmund Carver, Factor. December 14th, 1904. To Mr. Aldous Brennan, I must report a change in Thomas Hale. I write this section last, after deliberating for 2 days over whether it belongs in a business letter. I have decided it does. The purpose of my correspondence is accuracy, and accuracy requires I note what I observe. He returned from 3 days on the line on December 9th, looking thinner than when he left. He had eaten his provisions, he said, but had not felt hungry, and had forced himself. By the 11th, he was eating almost nothing at meals. He sat at the table with the rest of us, but pushed his food around the bowl and eventually set it aside. He was polite about it. He did not complain of illness. He said he simply was not hungry. On the 12th, he did not come to supper at all. I found him in his bunk, awake, staring at the ceiling. When I asked if he was unwell, he said that he felt fine. He said the smell of the food turned his stomach. He said he did not know why. I have not yet put this in the incident record because I am uncertain whether it belongs there. A man can go off his food for ordinary reasons. I am watching it. The third object came on the night of December 10th. None of us saw it arrive. In the morning, when Marsh opened the east door, he found a boot sitting upright in the snow, 2 feet from the threshold. A single boot, men's size, worn down on the heel, the lining still intact. No mate, no tracks leading to it or from it. The snow around it was undisturbed. I brought it inside and showed it to Peter. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said that he was going to write something down for me, and he went to his area and came back with a piece of paper on which he had written several words in his own language phonetically, and their meaning in English alongside. He said that if anyone in the crew began refusing food, I should read these words over the threshold each morning. He said it would probably not be enough, but it was something. He did not explain further. I thanked him, and I put the paper in my correspondence case. I am recording this because I record everything. I do not yet know what I am recording. Respectfully, Edmund Carver, Factor. December 29th, 1904. To Mr. Aldous Brennan. Peter Ekwok left the post on the morning of December 22nd. He told no one he was leaving. Marsh saw him at dawn, walking south with his pack, moving at a steady pace on the river ice. By the time I was informed and came outside, he was around the bend and out of sight. He left the piece of paper on my bunk. He had added a line to it in English at the bottom. Do not let the fire go out. Thomas Hale has eaten almost nothing in 17 days. He is not visibly ill. He is alert and coherent, and he sleeps normally, and he performs what light duties I assign him without complaint. He simply does not eat. When I pressed him on the evening of December 24th, firmly as his post factor, he looked at me and said, with no particular emphasis, that he was waiting for something that would satisfy him, and that what we had here did not satisfy him. Then he looked away, toward the east wall. The temperature inside the main building has not risen above 41 degrees since December 21st, despite the stove running hot. Pickford checked the stovepipe twice. There is no blockage. There is no gap in the chinking. The wood burns cleanly. The coal comes from somewhere I have not identified. On the night of the 26th, I woke at what I estimated to be 2 o'clock and heard very clearly from some distance east of the building the sound of a kettle, not a blow to metal, a ringing, hollow sound, as of something striking the inside of a tin vessel. Rhythmic. It continued for what I estimated at 4 minutes, and then stopped. I did not go outside. I am recording this. Respectfully, Edmund Carver, Factor, January 11th, 1905. To Mr. Aldous Brennan. Thomas Hale is gone. He was present at the evening of January 7th and absent on the morning of January 8th. The east door was unlatched. His coat and boots were in the building. I have written that twice because I do not know what else to say about it. Marsh and Pickford and I searched the immediate area for most of that day. We found depressions in the snow at the edge of the tree line, approximately 40 yards from the east wall. I want to describe them accurately. They were large, the span of a man's chest, roughly, if a man were to press both palms flat, and they were spaced at irregular intervals, the spacing of a stride much longer than a man's stride. But when I looked at them directly, standing over them, they read as tracks. When I moved to one side and looked along the line of them from a low angle, they nearly disappeared, as if they had no real depth. The same depressions. I stood over them again, and they were clearly there. I moved to the side, and they were nearly gone. Marsh said it was a trick of the light. Pickford said nothing. I wrote it down. I have been reading Peter's paper each morning over the threshold. My pronunciation is certainly wrong. I do not know if it matters. I am also keeping the fire higher than is strictly necessary for warmth. I have not told the others I am doing this deliberately. Respectfully, Edmund Carver, Factor. January 24th, 1905. To Mr. Aldous Brennan. Aldous Marsh left the post 9 days ago. He did not go silently in the night. He told me at breakfast that he was walking out to Bettles and that he would send help back when he arrived. I gave him what I could spare from the provisions and watched him go south on the river ice. He was moving well when I last saw him. I do not know if he reached Bettles. If he had, I would expect someone to have come. It has been 9 days. The river is passable. There is no reasonable explanation for the silence from the south, except the ones I am not writing down. George Pickford is still here. He has not spoken much. He tends the stove without being asked, and he eats at every meal, and he sleeps in his bunk, though badly. Last night he called out several times in what I thought was French, which is not a language he speaks. When I woke him, he was confused and could not tell me what he had been dreaming. I have moved my own bunk to within 4 feet of the stove. The kettle sound came again on the night of the 20th, closer than before. Pickford heard it too. I could see by his face that he heard it, though we did not speak of it until morning, and then only briefly. He said it sounded like it was just outside the east wall. I had estimated the same. I am keeping the fire burning. I have enough fuel for 6 weeks if I am careful. Respectfully, Edmund Carver, Factor. February 9th, 1905. To whoever finds this. My name is Edmund Carver. I was Factor of the Koyukuk post for the Northern Interior Trade Consortium. If you are reading this, I ask that you forward it to Mr. Aldous Brennan in Fairbanks, or to any representative of the consortium, or to my sister, Mrs. Helena Morrow, in Winnipeg. I have no other family. George Pickford stopped eating 4 days ago. He is in his bunk. He is not sleeping. He does not respond when I speak to him. He has turned his face toward the east wall, and he has not turned it back. I understand now what Peter saw when we showed him that first hatchet. I do not think he failed us when he left. I think he held on longer than most would have, and that leaving when he did was the only honest thing he had left to offer. I am not angry. I have been keeping a record of everything because I did not know what else to do. That is what a factor does. You keep the record. You account for what comes in and what goes out and what cannot be explained, and you write it down and send it south and let someone else decide what it means. 4 men were in my care this winter. I do not know where 3 of them are now. The 4th is in the bunk by the east wall. I will keep the fire burning. That is what Peter told me to do, and I have done it, and I intend to keep doing it. I have fuel enough. Whether that is the right thing, whether fire is what stands between us, and whatever has been walking outside this east wall since November, I cannot say with any certainty. I have no certainty left about anything except the fire and the record. The kettle sound came last night, from very close. I did not hear it stop. I'm going to add more wood to the year. The trapline ran 42 kilometers northeast out of the cabin, looping through spruce forest and across 2 frozen lake surfaces before doubling back through the high country. Elias Folk had been running it for 22 seasons. He knew its moods the way a person knows the moods of something that has no mood, that simply is, the way ice knows the shape of a riverbed without thinking about it. He arrived at the cabin on the 8th of November, a week earlier than usual, because the cold had come early, not dramatically, not record-breakingly, simply earlier than the calendar said it should, the air tightening in October the way it normally tightened in the 2nd week of November, the ground sealing over while the calendar still read autumn. He noted it in his log without particular concern. Early cold happened. Some years ran long, some ran short. He unpacked his gear, checked the stove, replaced 2 sections of stovepipe that had gone soft from last spring's rust, and started running traps on the 9th. By the 3rd week of November, it was colder than any 3rd week of November he could remember, and he had been doing this since he was 31 years old. Not significantly colder, not dangerously, just past where it should have been. The thermometer on the outside wall read temperatures that belonged to January, not late November, and the sky had taken on the particular quality of a Yukon January sky, that absolute clarity, that hard absence of moisture, the stars at night so precise and unforgiving that looking at them felt like a minor violation. He noted it in the log. He kept running the line. The first time he heard it, he was lying in his sleeping bag, reading by headlamp, a field guide to northern birds he'd brought, because he'd found an unfamiliar track in the snow 2 days earlier and hadn't been able to place it. Something wrong about the toe spread, the depth for its apparent size. He'd been puzzling over it. He was on page 47, an entry about the snowy owl's winter range, when the sound came through the spruce to the west of the cabin. A long, descending moan. Low. It moved through the trees, the way wind moved through trees. Or rather, it moved through the trees, the way wind moved through trees when the wind had a particular quality, when it was coming in at a low angle through dense growth and finding some channel between trunks that made it resonate. He lay still for a moment, listening. Nothing. The stove popped. The fire settled. He turned back to the field guide. He got through 2 more pages before he heard it again. It was lower this time, or seemed lower. It was difficult to know, the way it was always difficult to know, with wind sounds, whether they were changing or whether the listener's attention was simply moving deeper into them, finding harmonics that had been there all along. He put the book down and looked at the ceiling. He listened to it for a while. He counted perhaps 6 full repetitions, each separated by long silences, before it stopped entirely and did not return. Wind, he decided. Something about the weather system settling in from the northwest, channeling between the ridge and the tree line, finding the gap. He'd heard unusual wind sounds in this country before. Wind did things in extreme cold that it didn't do in milder temperatures. The air itself was different, denser. It carried sound differently. It moved differently through the same passages. He closed the field guide, turned off his headlamp, and went to sleep. He heard it again on the 3rd night, and the 5th, and the 7th. By the 7th night, he had stopped thinking of it as wind, not because he had decided it wasn't wind, but because he had started tracking it. That was the thing he did with things he didn't understand. He tracked them. You could not resolve something you hadn't documented. So he added a column to his daily log. Time, direction, duration, approximate distance. And he began noting the sound the way he would note any anomaly in the field. What the log showed him over the following week was that the sound came from the west-southwest on some nights, from the south on others, and once, on a particularly clear night, when the temperature dropped past what his thermometer could read, from the east, which was not how prevailing weather worked in this region. The weather came from the northwest. Wind-driven sounds moved, with the weather not across it. A sound that came from different quadrants on different nights was not being carried by the prevailing system. It was coming from somewhere that moved. He did not write that interpretation in the log. He wrote the raw data: time, direction, duration, distance. The interpretation he kept in his head, where he can examine it without it becoming something fixed. The game was wrong, too. He'd noticed that earlier, the 2nd week, but hadn't connected it to anything. His trap yield was down by roughly 60% compared to his 22-season average for November in this area. The marten that normally worked the creek drainage were absent from every set. The rabbit sign that should have been everywhere in the willow stands near the eastern lake was sparse, and what sign there was looked old, like the animals had passed through and then stopped coming. Even the ravens, which were usually reliable indicators of what was moving and where, had thinned out. He'd seen 2 in 4 days. He normally saw 20. Things moved away from cold the way they moved away from danger. But this cold was coming from no specific direction. It was just there, deepening steadily past any pattern he could account for through weather records or memory. On the 14th night, the howl came close enough that he heard it clearly for the first time, clearly enough to understand something about its register. It was not high. Wind sounds, even low wind sounds, carried a certain pitch, a certain brightness at the top of their range, even when the dominant note was bass. This sound had no brightness at the top. It was entirely low, entirely resonant, moving through the infrared of audible sound rather than through any part of the range he associated with weather. It was the sound something living would make, but nothing living made a sound that moved that way, that descended that slowly, that held the same tone for as long as this held it. He was standing at the window when it came, and he could see the tree line south of the cabin in the moonlight, about 200 meters out, the spruce black and motionless, in no wind at all. He stood and watched the tree line. He watched for a long time after the sound stopped. Nothing moved in the trees. Nothing moved anywhere. He added the entry to the log, wrote the distance as approximately 100 to 200 meters south, and went to sit by the stove. The stove was running full. He'd loaded it an hour earlier with good dry spruce, and the iron was hot to the hand. But the far corner of the cabin, the corner nearest the south wall, nearest the tree line, was cold. Not slightly cold. Cold the way a January morning is cold, when the fire has been out all night. That deep, particular cold that has had time to settle into objects and make them part of itself. He looked at the corner for a while. He looked at the thermometer inside the cabin, which he kept for reference. It read warmer than the corner felt. He moved his sleeping bag away from the south wall that night. He did not say why, even to himself. He simply moved it. On the 16th night, he coughed. A dry cough. Nothing. He'd had the dryness in his throat all week from the cold and the dry air. Nothing unusual. He coughed once, a short, sharp sound in the silence of the cabin, and before the sound had finished traveling, he heard, from somewhere south of the cabin, from somewhere in or very near the tree line, the sound begin. He sat absolutely still. The sound ran for several seconds. That same long, low, descending register, full in the chest, carrying something in it that the wind did not carry. He sat still, and he thought about the timing of it. He thought about whether he had ever, in 22 seasons, heard weather respond to a sound he made. He thought about whether wind, channeling through spruce trunks, had ever answered him back. He wrote in the log. Possible correlation. Sound, followed cough, within 1 to 2 seconds. Investigate. He did not write what he thought the correlation meant, because what he thought the correlation meant was not something he was prepared to commit to paper yet. He had been running a Yukon trapline alone for 22 years, and he was not a person who frightened easily. He had been in country where the temperature dropped past 50 below, where the trees cracked like gunshots in the cold, where the Yikesig light failed by mid-afternoon and did not return until nearly 11 the following morning. He had been in country that wanted to kill him and knew how to do it. He was not afraid of that country, and he was not afraid of things that moved in that country, because he knew what moved in that country. He had seen wolf and wolverine and bear and moose at every range and in every condition. He knew what things sounded like. He knew what things did. This was not something he knew. He had one more experience to note before he decided he was leaving. 5 nights after the cough, lying in his sleeping bag with the headlamp off, the cabin fully dark, he heard it again from the south. The usual direction now, usual distance, the same unvarying low descending moan. He lay still, and he listened. And then, in a moment, he was certain of, and then immediately uncertain of, and then could not stop returning to. The sound changed its character, shifted, not into a different pitch, but into something that had shape, syllabic shape. 2 sounds, something like 2 sounds, something structured, the way a name is structured, the way any word is structured, a shape in the air that his mind tried to resolve into meaning before he could stop it from doing so. He lay still for a very long time after that. He was not certain. He wrote in the log the next morning, possible pareidolia, auditory pattern matching, inconclusive, do not overinterpret. But he packed that morning. He started methodically, the way he did everything. Food first, then gear, then the sleeping kit, then the personal equipment, all of it going into the pack or into the sled in the order he would need it during travel. It took most of the day. By late afternoon, he had everything ready. He would pull the traps in the morning, early, and leave by midday. He ate a slow meal by the stove. He did not check his log. He looked at the south wall of the cabin and thought about the corner that had been cold and the temperature that kept deepening past any weather system he could account for, and the ravens that had stopped coming, and the marten gone from the drainages, and 22 seasons of knowing what a wilderness winter sounded like. When the howl came that night, it was different. Not in register, still that same low, resonant, descending tone that had no brightness at its top. Different in distance, much closer than it had been. He had been placing it, night by night, at roughly 200 meters. Tonight, it was not 200 meters. Tonight, it was 40 meters, perhaps, 50, close enough that he could hear, under the main tone, something else. A quality, not breath exactly, but the thing beneath breath, the thing that breath organizes around. It came from the south, and the south was where the tree line was, and the tree line was the beginning of the only route out. He sat very still by the stove. The lamp was burning. Outside the window, the moonlit snow was flat and unmarked, and the spruces stood black and motionless, the way they had stood every night. He had sat here looking at them, unchanged, indifferent. The cold came through the south wall in a way it hadn't come through any wall before. A directional cold. A cold with a source. He listened to see if the sound would move, whether it would come from a different direction, the way it had sometimes come from the west, sometimes from the east, in those early nights when he had been tracking direction. Whether it would circle, whether it would change, it did not come again. The night was silent. The snow outside stayed flat and unmarked. He sat by the stove with his packed gear behind him, and he looked at the south wall, and he listened to the silence that had replaced it, and he thought about whether silence meant it had moved away, or whether silence meant something else. Whether the absence of sound was a different kind of answer than the sound had been. Outside, the winter continued. It had been continuing for a long time. It showed no sign of being done. Thanks for making it to the end of the video. If you enjoyed the stories and want to hear more just like them, subscribe. I release 3 new videos each week. Good night.